From where we last left off, we have discussed the construction, the maiden voyage, and the history of the RMS Empress of Ireland. It is now 1:50 a.m. in the early morning hours of May 29th, 1914, and the Empress of Ireland has just spotted lights through the fog. Captain Kendall noticed this ship coming out of the fog and tried to reverse the Empress of Ireland, but this ship is coming towards them and they cannot stop. So to help tell the story of the Empress of Ireland, though, there is actually one ship that needs to be mentioned, and that is the SS Storstad, which is a Norwegian collier that was actually involved with the collision and the sinking of the RMS Empress of Ireland. So we're actually going to go over the basic history of the ship. We're not going to go into full in-depth of the whole career and only focus on the construction and the collision with the Empress of Ireland and what happened afterwards. The ship you see in this photo is the SS Storstad. The Storstad is a steam cargo ship built in 1910 by Armstrong, Whitworth and Company, Ltd. of Newcastle for A.F. Cladless and Company in Sandefjord, Norway. She would carry ore and coal during tramp trades. So a tramp trade is basically a shipping method that involves contracting a vessel to perform one or more services without a fixed schedule or an itinerary. Tramp vessels, also known as tramp ships, and contract carriers that can transport to anything just to about anywhere. They're actually slow and not used for fast delivery, so instead they can adapt to the needs of each cargo and are used for connecting the archipelagos, islands, and providing offshore services. The keel of the ship was laid down at Armstrong, Whitworth & Co. Low Walker Shipyard in Newcastle and launched on October 4th in 1910. During her launch, she struck a steamship called the SS Dardania from Trieste and her stern was damaged. From 1911 to May of 1914, she transports different ore, coal, and goods to different areas in the United States and Canada, and also other areas as well, and even held the record of the largest single load of iron ore ever carried by a single ship. Currently, the captain of the Storstad is this man, Captain Thomas Anderson. He has been the captain of the Storstad for nearly 3 years and had been at sea for 30 years. His wife, Mrs. Anderson, even joins her husband on voyages to keep him in check. At the same time the Empress of Ireland left for Liverpool, the Storstad, which sailed from North Sydney to Quebec, is loaded with 10,400 tons of coal on May 26. Was a short distance away down the river on her way to pick up her pilot. As both ships were enveloped by the fog, Captain Kendall stopped the Empress of Ireland to wait for the fog to pass. But he didn't know that the Storstad has 10,400 tons of coal and blasted their 3 whistles. And at that moment, Kendall sprang into action and tried to speed his ship and hard over the Empress. With little effort he made, he was too late. At 1:54 a.m., the Storstad collided with the Empress of Ireland in the middle. The reinforced bow penetrated the ship like a knife into a cake. The impact was slight, but there was actually no resistance of the hull of the Empress of Ireland wasn't reinforced. The bow penetrated through cabins and corridors. Anyone sleeping in his path were immediately killed. As Kendall shouted through his megaphone telling the captain of the Storstad to keep the engines full ahead, the Storstad made the one mistake it shouldn't have done. She stopped. The currents of the St. Lawrence River drifted the Storstad away from the Empress of Ireland and vanished into the fog. The Empress of Ireland began to take on a severe less to starboard as water raced through the boiler and engine rooms. The freighter's bow left a huge wound 25 feet deep inside the ship and 24 feet wide, and the height of a 3-story building. Passengers inside were thrown from their beds during the impact and are already fighting for their lives or worse, dying. As 60,000 gallons of river water flooded into the hallways, the watertight door plan was put into action as stewards ran to their positions to try to close off the doors. But unfortunately, they would die from where they are standing. Anyone who came out of their cabins were met with river water surging in and flattening everything in its path. Down in the boiler room, the men that were used to seeing the hull of the ship separating the water from the inside, but never see steel bust through the side where they work in a huge torrent of water coming in. They managed to climb up the escape ladders, but they didn't have time to close the watertight doors below them. Passengers were struggling on the left side as the ship leaned to the starboard side. It was kind of like this. As the doors were shut, there was actually did remain open, but unfortunately, the plan to close off the watertight compartments and seal the ship, the plan absolutely failed, and the Empress of Ireland is now a doomed liner. Captain Kendall didn't need to send out a inspection team, but he already knows it. He ordered lifeboats to be uncovered and loaded with passengers right away. His crew did what he said, and the starboard side lifeboats were actually prepared, but unfortunately the port side right here were considered useless, and there were no point in trying to lower the port side, and the list is badly severe. Below decks of the Empress of Ireland, not everyone's familiar with the hallways, considering it was their first night, and passengers started clamoring for a way out. Prior before the collision, passengers were awakened by the loud horn generated by the Empress of Ireland, and these passengers were up on deck, were lucky enough to board a lifeboat, but unfortunately for the rest, they were never seen again. It didn't take long for the ship to know it's in complete danger, as the lights faded out to a dull red, similar to the lighting on the Titanic before the final plunge. This is caused by a loss of steam from the flooding boiler rooms, as they fade from a bright white to a dull red, indicating that the dynamos weren't getting enough steam to turn at their full RPMs. Captain Kendall also did the one thing that he should not have done, and that is try to save his ship by beaching it into the soft mud. But to be fair on this, he was actually near the southern bank of the river, and considering it was his only option. But the biggest problem is that the forced flooding, with a massive gaping hole on the side of the ship, it would not work out. Captain Kendall ordered the ship to go full speed, but the problem is the chief engineer reported to the captain that there's no steam left. So forced flooding is basically a terminology of accelerating a ship that already has a breach in it, in a hull, thus adding in a higher inflow of water. Perfect examples would basically be the aftermath of the iceberg collision with the RMS Titanic, as the ship actually steamed on a little bit after collision. Lusitania after the torpedo strike, and the HMHS Protect, which it sailed towards the island of Kea after striking a mine allowed water in. So another thing to take in is when the Storstad ran the Empress of Ireland, she actually smashed through both boiler rooms, which is right here in the lower decks, and both rooms became flooded in. Also up on top of the open wound, there will actually be open portholes to which it actually allows water to flood into the rooms that are not even flooded yet. 4 minutes after the collision, the lights for the Empress of Ireland went out completely, plunging the ship into total black darkness. Anyone below deck are trapped inside the total pitch black darkness, as it was the ultimate death sentence, as the ship is already slanting with river water flooding in. It was impossible to hold on to something and climb up the stairs to find your way out. Starboard lifeboats were swung out and ready, as the first lifeboat to be broken free from its chocks without any means of the crew was Lifeboat 1, as it broke free and spills its occupants into the cold St. Lawrence River. One on the port side would be lodged, but it spilled out its passengers and into the water, but there is not enough time, as water slowly crept its way into the open promenades underneath the passengers and crew's feet. Another lifeboat that was launched was Lifeboat number 15, but the ropes broke and spilled out its occupants and capsized. 2 more successful launches of Boat 1 and 3 rowed away from the capsizing ship. Another pair, 9 and 13, were also launched, and they too rowed away from the ship. So a complete mystery that baffles everyone in the maritime community is that there was a muffled explosion on the Empress of Ireland that is actually ruled as a boiler explosion. So for those that are not familiar, a boiler explosion happens when the boiler is actually fully pressurized and it becomes a gigantic bomb. If this pressure is released, the steam will be released. But if it's overpressurized and the steam pressure still climbs up, a cataclysmic explosion might take place. Now, this is normally common on steam trains at the time, but there's been incidents, especially with steamships, when a boiler exploded due to being overpressurized. A notable example I could think of is the Sultania, which was destroyed in 1865 by 3 boilers exploding and sank not far from Memphis, Tennessee. Now, I won't go into further detail about the Sultania. I will do a video about that ship in the upcoming future. But the cause of the boiler explosion is actually still, to this very day, it's unknown. But it did contribute to what happened next to the Empress of Ireland. 10 minutes after the collision, the Empress of Ireland lost her fight to the sea and rolls over onto her starboard side, throwing passengers that are not clinging on to anything into the St. Lawrence River. Anything that is not secured on deck are also thrown into the water. Anyone trapped inside the hallways were actually thrown off balance, and they would actually die inside the ship, drowning them from where they are standing. Life buoys that were also thrown into the water that were actually put on after the sinking of the Titanic disaster had a chemical mixture that cast out a bright blue light if a passenger were to, in case of an event, actually did fell overboard. The SS Storstad, ironically being the cause and the sole witness of the Empress of Ireland's sinking, began lowering her own lifeboats and rowed towards the sounds of the passengers screaming across the St. Lawrence River. It would take a while for the lifeboats to reach the known position where the RMS Empress of Ireland went down. As the passengers actually climbed up and over the rail and on the side of the Empress of Ireland's port side, there was actually that false sense of illusion to which the sinking of the Empress of Ireland just hit the bottom and actually did stay level with the water. You know, this is kind of like the Titanic video that I discussed about Collapsible A while ago, is that there was that false sense of illusion as Collapsible A was being set up, as the ship had that list towards port side, making the crew and the passengers think on the starboard side is they think they got enough time to get Collapsible A set up and lowered away properly. But what they did not know was that this illusion was actually dashed as the Titanic unexpectedly evened out and took a dramatic plunge. In this case, the Empress of Ireland actually went down by the bow, but then again, you're going to have some saying that she actually went down by the stern as well. Considering where the puncture is, where the wound is in the middle, on the starboard side, she pretty much just settled into the water. And basically, from what I think, she basically went down by the stern, considering the way how the shape the bow is to this very day. Then, in 14 minutes, the Empress of Ireland sank into the icy St. Lawrence River, taking with her our 1,012 lives, as 465 would survive. As the ship disappeared, hundreds of people were struggling for survival, as the temperature of the water at the time was 36 degrees Fahrenheit. Now you're possibly wondering where I got that 36 degree Fahrenheit water from. Well, I basically looked it up online, and it did say 36, so I went to this book, On a Sea of Glass. Now, I did use this book in a couple of my Titanic videos, and I'm actually using this for the Empress of Ireland video. Now, if you would have turn to page 238, it's a chart called Nearly Unsurvivable. It tells you the water temperature and the timing of exhaustion and survival time. Now, on here, now I don't know if you can actually see this, is the water, since the water temperature was actually 36 degrees, that means you have a survival time of half hour to 90 minutes. And exhaustion would be about 15 to 30 minutes. So in comparison to this, Titanic's water temperature at the time when she sank in the North Atlantic Ocean was 28 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 2 degrees Celsius. Survivors in the lifeboats began seeing the ship that hit them, the Storstad. Its lifeboats were in the water heading towards them. Captain Anderson, who was awake, checked his ship for any damage, but luckily the Storstad did not sink. The fog lifted after the Empress sank, to which the air from inside the ship actually rose as the air was actually expelled out as the water flooded in. And for the next 3 hours, 75 were saved from the water, including Captain Kendall, as he was flung from the bridge wing and into the water. As he boarded the Storstad, exhausted and tired, he went to confront Captain Anderson, and the conversation kind of went like this. "Are you the master of this vessel?" Kendall asked Anderson. Then before Anderson can answer, Kendall shouted at him, "You have sunk my ship." At this point, both captains argue back and forth for a brief time. Basically, Captain Anderson saying, "No, you didn't." There will actually be an investigation afterward later on. And when the sun rose, Lady Ellen and the pilot cutter, the Eureka, arrived to survey at the wreck site. And as the Eureka is actually the last vessel to see the Empress still afloat, they would actually begin to pull bodies from the water. Among the dead were the Irvings. They were last seen clinging onto each other, similarly to the Strausses on the Titanic. Another young couple who traveled with the Irvings, the Nevilles, also died. Sir Henry Seton Carr also died, but he was found 2 days later down the river. He died trying to help another passenger with his life vest. The biggest blow was the Salvation Army band, which was also lost to the sinking, but only 8 of them survived, as none of the band survived. Commissioner David Rees also died as he gave away his life jacket and stayed on board. Out of the 138 children on board, only 4 of them survived. Grace Hannigan, aged 6 years old, is one of the youngest survivors on the Empress of Ireland. Her father was a bandmaster for the Salvation Army, who too was lost to the sinking, and her mother would also be lost as well. Grace Hannigan is the last survivor of the sinking of the Empress of Ireland. She died on May 15, 1955, one day before her 88th birthday. None of the third-class stewards would also survive the sinking of the disaster as well. The Empress of Ireland wasn't widely reported or famous as those from the Titanic disaster in 1912. The Empress of Ireland inquiry took place on June 16th of 1914, and it was headed by the Right Honorable Lord Mersey. Now, you possibly heard of this name before, both the Titanic and later the Lusitania disaster inquiry, so he is very familiar with maritime disasters. Along with him are 2 commissioners, Sir Adolphe Basile Rothier of Quebec and Chief Justice Ezekiel MacLeod, and I apologize if I butcher both of those names. The inquiry actually lasted for 11 days, and they gathered 61 different witnesses, 24 crew and officers from the Empress of Ireland, 12 officers of the Storstad, 5 from the Empress, and 20 others. There were 2 different stories, one from the Storstad claiming that the Empress of Ireland altered her course with the ship proceeding down the river, while thus the masthead lights of the Storstad were visible. Captain Kendall intended on passing the Storstad starboard to starboard. So, who was right and who was wrong? After all the evidence was presented, the commissioners asked the question, who's to blame? Namely, to which both ships changed course in the fog, as they came to no other conclusion that the Storstad ported her helm and changed her course. After the inquiry was complete, Captain Anderson quoted saying that Lord Mersey was a fool and intended to file a lawsuit against the Canadian Pacific Railway, to which CPR won against the Storstad's company, A.F. Clavinus and Co. for $2 million Canadian dollars. But they didn't stop there, as the owners tried to enter an unsuccessful counterclaim against CPR, and afterwards they seized the Storstad and sold the ship for $175,000 for Prudential Trust. Afterwards, just a little over 2 months after the sinking of the Empress of Ireland, World War I finally started. Thus, the sinking of the Empress of Ireland is widely forgotten up until YouTube maritime historians started producing videos about the Empress of Ireland, and even this documentary helped contributed to making sure the story of the Empress of Ireland and her victims are never forgotten. Today, the Empress of Ireland sits at a shallow depth of 130 feet, sitting on its starboard side with masts and funnels fallen over after the ship landed on its side. There's no known date of the discovery, but shortly after the sinking, a salvage operation began to uncover the purser's safe in the mail. During the dive, diving to the site is dangerous due to the unpredictable currents. The first victim, a man by the name of Edward Kazaboom, was killed as he slipped from the hull and plummeted 20 meters to the riverbed, closing or rupturing his air hose. In 1964, Canadian divers revisited the wreck to recover a brass bell, and in the 1970s, another group recovered a telemotor, pieces of the Marconi wireless equipment, a brass porthole, and a compass. In 1999, the Empress of Ireland is declared a historical and archaeological importance and is protected under the Cultural Property Act and is listed in the Register of Historic Sites of Canada, a first being for an underwater wreck site. While the wreck is accessible for recreational divers, the site is very dangerous due to the cold water, the restricted visibility, and strong currents. As we close out the 110th anniversary of the sinking of the Empress of Ireland, it's our job to make sure that these stories are never forgotten. And first of all, I just want to thank a lot of people, says in History Inside a Nutshell, and I've actually done narrated a video about the Irvings. I will actually link that on the top corner of your screen as well. And also another group of people I like to thank as well is Eleanor from Shipwreck Sunday, for this little inspiration, and also, of course, the YouTubers I actually did through in the beginning, and when I actually showed off the list of videos on them. Yeah, this documentary is actually inspired by those same people as well. From Mike Brady from Ocean Liner Designs to historic travels, nautical history, you name it. So, anyway, I just want to thank you guys for watching this documentary. It took me a little while to make, and I'm sorry for the little bit of lack of delay. Originally, I was going to do a Lusitania one, but I kind of got sidetracked and figured, you know what, I'm just going to put that on the shelf for next year and do the Empress of Ireland instead. So my next documentary, it will be in July, and I will basically try to get it done because I'm going to be, traveling out of town here and there. So feel free to keep a lookout for that. So once again, my name is Dustin, and I will see you guys in another video.